So on behalf of the organizing committee, we are glad and honored to have you here today with us. The bilateral relations between China and the United States has never been tested so severely since 1979 when the two countries established their formal diplomatic relations. And those were facing old and new challenges which continue to shape one of the most important bilateral relations in the world. And all these challenges must be addressed constructively. Under this background, ICAS 2019 annual conference, we're aiming at identifying the existing risks and challenges that we face today between the US and China strategic competition, which range from security and politics to trade and also to maritime security areas. And despite all these risks and challenges, we should also know the achievement and efforts that the two countries have been made in a global context on cooperation. Before we start, I would like to thank our co-organizer of this conference, the National Institute for China American Studies and the National Institute for South China Sea Studies and the China Institute from University of Alberta in Canada and the China Program at the Carter Center, and also the Wuhan University's China Institute of Boundary and Ocean Study that worked together with ICAS to put today's program together. We're delighted to have the leadership of ICAS partner institutions with us today, and Dr. Shicun and Dr. Liu Yawei, and also Professor Gordon Holden, who are going to give their remark in the next 30 minutes. In addition to the participants who are present here today with us, today's event will also be joined by those going to watch the discussion via our live stream. Without further ado, now I would like to invite Dr. Shicun, the president of National Institute for the South China Sea Studies, to give his remark. And he also served as the chairman of the advisory board of ICAS. Welcome, Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Dr. Hong. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As one of the organizers of this conference, the organizers are Carter Center, the China Institute of the University of Alberta, Canada, and the ICAS. I would want to start by welcoming you all who are from United States, Canada, and China to participate in this event. Well, my presentation might take a little bit longer than it is supposed to be, so please to be in patience. As we know, this year marks the 40th anniversary of the establishment of Sino-US diplomatic relations. So I would like to take this opportunity to make some brief comments regarding the current status of Sino-US relations and the South China Sea issue in particular. The first one is about China-US relations. Over the past months or so, positive signs with regard to Sino-US trade negotiations indicated that the two sides have reached a basic consensus on a series of issues and are expecting to sign a final agreement in the future. The haze of the trade war hanging over the two countries is finally beginning to dissipate, and economic cooperation, the foundation of Sino-US relations, has not collapsed from my perspective. As China and the United States begin pulling themselves out of the quagmire of trade frictions, the deteriorating bilateral relations are being maintained under control. Moreover, new signs of detente and progress are rapidly emerging. Nevertheless, the detente remains unstable since the destructive bilateral security competition continues to prevail. Additionally, unresolved issues remain, and the time frame for the signing agreement is unknown. Some analysts claim that the new trade agreement, even if signed, still would neither solve the structural contradictions between the two countries in economic field, nor would it prevent a strong economic competition between the two countries, especially in the high-tech industries. Since Trump took office, the US government and the Pentagon have issued 3 policy reports in succession. Those reports explicitly named China as a revisionist power and its main strategic competitor. And some senior US officials also publicly called China a major threat to US national security. The perception of China being the main strategic competitor has entrenched in the US strategic community and is hard to alter soon. Influenced by such a negative cognition, the United States has escalated the frequency of its freedom navigation operations in the South China Sea. It has proposed to review the Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines. It was signed between the Philippines and the United States in 1952. They intend to include the disputed waters in the South China Sea into the scope of its application of this treaty. The United States also strengthened the defense cooperation with other claimant states in the South China Sea region and tried to interfere with the COC, the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea consultations. And the military contest between China and the United States in the South China Sea will become seesaw battle, and the possibility of maritime skirmishes or local maritime crises still exists from my perspective. And the announcement of the Taiwan Travel Act and the Taiwan Assurance Act, the successive visits to Taiwan by senior US officials, the clamor for US-Taiwan joint military exercises, frequent passage of US warships through Taiwan Strait, and the increasing in the US arms sales to Taiwan all indicate that the United States is determined to step on the red line of the Taiwan issue. So Trump's aggressive strategy on Taiwan issue will greatly increase the possibility of the crisis in Sino-US relations in the future. So, in general, these trends feature not only a temporary detente in economic cooperation, but also continued intensification of strategic security rivalry in the current Sino-US relationship. Second, about the South China Sea issue. Overall, the current atmosphere of the South China Sea situation indicates a general state of cooling down and stabilization, with developments seen on the two contrasting fronts. On the one hand, maritime cooperation, including cooperation in low-sensitive areas, such as contained in the DOC. Such cooperations between China and the other littoral states in the South China Sea has been continuously advanced with new progress. A timetable and a roadmap have been established for the consultations on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. These developments have all contributed to a stabilization of China-claimant states relationship and the China-ASEAN relations with regard to the South China Sea. On the other hand, the geopolitical competition in the South China Sea, characterized by the military contest between China and the United States, is intensifying, which is affecting the stability of the South China Sea. In the foreseeable future, military provocations from the United States and its allies against China in the South China Sea is expected to aggravate. Differences and contradictions among relevant parties inside and outside of the region with regard to the COC consultation will gradually emerge. Why? For example, when China and the other climate states, particularly 10 ASEAN members, come to the scope of the COC application, or self-restraint elements, or legal status of the COC, or dispute settlement mechanism, there will be differences between China and ASEAN member countries, particularly those climate states. But also influenced by the South China Sea arbitration. The Philippines initiated the South China Sea arbitration in 2013 and concluded by arbitral tribunal in 2016. So the award is still, has its influence to the South China Sea issue, and the discord sown by outsiders. So individual claimants may take dangerous unilateral actions. If we look at what some claimant states have been doing in the disputed area, since 2017 and 2018, we will find that some countries now, have been taking unilateral actions. So this will lead to potential new frictions and conflict. And the South China Sea Maritime Cooperation in this regard will once again become an uphill journey. As a defender of peace and stability of the South China Sea, China firmly safeguarding its territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests will actively promote the overall development of South China Sea as a harmonious and stable region. To maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea, China and the United States, from my point of view, must meet each other halfway. It is suggested that if the United States halts its provocative military actions against China in the South China Sea, then China will keep its military deployments in the South China Sea, particularly in the islands China claimed, within reasonable limits and make their self-defensive nature more transparent. Simultaneously, China should also speed up the upgrading of the civilian service capabilities of the islands and reefs, as well as provide more public goods to the international community. So China should also work with the United States to press ahead with the formulation of maritime crisis response measures and a standardized set of operating procedure according to the CUES, the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea. Furthermore, China and the United States should discuss the establishment of a Sino-Us South China Sea Working Group or a meal-to-meal hotline mechanism to prevent potential conflicts, reduce military confrontation, and refrain from jeopardizing the peace and the stability of South China Sea. And also, China should always stay committed to promoting the COC consultation and seek common ground, while shelving differences with other parties and meet them halfway to reach an early agreement based on a single draft of COC negotiating text. Meanwhile, China encouraged the United States to add positive momentum to the COC consultations, withdraw its destructives. In these waters, we also suggest China takes the COC consultation as an opportunity to establish consultation and cooperation promoting mechanism in the fields of maritime search and rescue, combating armed robbery and piracy, coping with natural disasters, conservation of fishery resources, and marine scientific research and environmental protection, so as to provide a reliable guarantee for the free and safe navigation in the international waterway of the South China Sea. So, in conclusion, from my own point of view, the future South China Sea situation will be driven by 4 scenarios. One is the phenomena I just mentioned, particularly conducted by the United States. And the second one is unilateral actions conducted by other climatic states in the South China Sea region. The third one is the island reclamation and facilities deployment in those islands, those countries occupied. The fourth one is the COC consultation. So those 4 scenarios are main factors that affect the South China Sea situation in the future. I come from Hainan Island, the southernmost province of China, where last year, April 13th, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the central government support for building the whole island of Hainan into a free trade pilot zone and a free trade port with Chinese characteristics, which release a positive signal for China's continued and deepened reform and opening up to the outside world. So at this time, the construction of the Hainan Free Trade Zone is in full swing and is open to U.S. compromises for investment and opportunity sharing through economic and trade cooperation with Chinese partners. So finally, as the chairman of the advisory board of the Institute for China-American Studies, I'm glad to see the positive efforts and the results made by ICAS in promoting exchanges and the mutual trust between academic institutions and think tanks from both sides, as well as playing a positive role in the development of Sino-US relations. So it is hoped that the 2 countries will continue to develop platforms for exchanges and collaboration between their think tanks in the future, so as to dissolve miscalculation through communication, to replace accusation with dialogue, eliminate confrontation through cooperation, and consolidate the fruits, as well as provide popular support for the stable development of Sino-US relations. Now, I would like to conclude my remarks once again by thanking all of you for joining us today, and appreciate your positive and valuable contributions to this event. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wu, for sharing with us your views on the status of U.S.-China relations and certainly your expertise on the South China Sea. Now, let's join me welcome Professor Gordon Holden, who is the Director of China Institute at the University of Alberta from Canada. And he's also a key member of ICAS Advisory Board team, also a very senior Canadian diplomat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hong Nong and President Wu. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm perhaps one of the only people here who's neither an American or a Chinese, but I would submit that for those of us in third countries, we also have a huge stake in the success of Sino-American relations. And I think as a Canadian, I can indicate that we have actually to some extent already been a casualty of that rivalry. Every day is important, I think, in the U.S.-China relationship, but I sense that we're at perhaps a point of transition or of sensitivity where that may be especially true. If American and Chinese leaders can stabilize the relationship, which has more influence on the stability of the global trading system than any other, we will also benefit, particularly trading nations such as Canada. Of even greater importance is the role that Washington and Beijing have in maintaining global security, particularly but not exclusively in the vast Asia-Pacific region. If we can be reassured the incipient trade war between the US and China can be ended, and a stable trade regime between the two largest economies be sustained, then I believe the prospects for global growth are bright. However, if the high-level trade relations, which are, I understand, to resume next week, should fail, the prospects for the expansion of the global community of the global economy are dim, with implications for us all, not just the United States and China. Should Beijing and Washington manage to achieve a security modus vivendi in the South China Sea, in space, and in managing all of the other security challenges that confront great powers, I am then confident that the chances that the international environment for the rest of the world will be one of stability and calm, or at least those prospects are enhanced. However, if going forward the Sino-American security relationship is fraught with confrontation, sharpened security competition, and heightened distrust, I fear that the knock-on effects of US-China tensions will be reflected in deteriorating security globally. The stakes could hardly be higher, not just for Americans and Chinese, but also for those other nations which have interests, strong interests, in the success or failure of Sino-American relations. To be frank, I'm not an optimist at this point, which makes meetings such as these particularly important. Nothing that I heard at the Boao Forum in Hainan last month gave me particular confidence, nor quite frankly did the calls that I had earlier this week in Washington. That's the reason perhaps for my net pessimism. I hope very much that I am wrong. I look forward, for those reasons in particular, to hearing the input and judgment of our distinguished panelists on these issues, which are really central to stability and prosperity of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Holden. It's always very interesting to hear a third party's perspective on these very important bilateral relations. Now, last but not least, let's invite Dr. Liu Yawei there. He is the director of China Program at Carter Center and also a very key member of ICAS. So I'd like to hear a view from American perspective on this relation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Hong. 40 years ago, I was a freshman. I was shocked by the decision of the normalization of the relationship between U.S. and China. 40 years later, I'm getting into Paul was talking about someone, George Shultz, living into 100 years, and President Carter is 94, 95. I'm getting into my 60s. I was even more astounded by the rising tide against China here in the U.S. However, I understand the frustration and disillusionment on the part of many Americans. In 1967, Richard Nixon wrote an article in Foreign Affairs, which he said, we cannot afford to have 600 million Chinese living in anger, relishing their hatred, and vowing to overthrow the Western civilization by the United States. So that eventually led to his historical 1972 trip and then 1979 normalization. However, 40 years later, to many Americans, Chinese are still angry, and it's not clear what China wants to do. So that's where frustration and resentment are lingering. Now, Chinese people like the United States. I think U.S. government now is trying to make the distinction between the Chinese people and the Chinese government. I think it's one of the most beautiful things for the U.S. when Chinese people think this is the safest place to invest, when Chinese parents want to send their children to study here, and when they actually think this is the most desirable nation to be the citizens, if possible. For the Chinese leadership, I think they're convinced the U.S. is an indispensable part for its quest to become a powerful country. However, the Chinese leadership is also gripped by the fear that the United States wants to change its political system. Now, U.S. should not be so nervous about the rise of China. The role the reversal of the role playing is quite shocking. I remember in 2013, Douglas Paul and others who came to our second forum on US-China relationship, everyone was talking about the documentary called The Silent Confrontation, 较量无声, in which the Chinese basically told their officers, their elite, their officials that US has this vast conspiracy to destabilize the US. Now, 5 years later, Dr. Wu mentioned several reports, China now is a revisionist power, that China has a vast conspiracy to overthrow the United States, to penetrate the American democracy, as was illustrated by the Hoover Asia Society report recently. I think to quote Andy Nathan, who was not able to go to China, but who keeps studying China, he said, Americans need not to be worried about the rise of China, because China is still developing. China has an uncertain political future. China is facing unimaginable challenges, that the U.S. cannot think of. If U.S. can do its things well, U.S. never has to worry about where China is going to go. So economic injustice, trade and financial barriers, forced technology transfer, I think these are all superficial problems at the present. They all can be fixed. So what is the fundamental problem between the relationship? I think in the words of Larry Summers, who has been trumpeting this message recently in the US as well as in China, is that what exactly does US want? And what exactly does China want? We all know, I think at least from the rhetoric, China does not want to change the United States. China has no intention whatsoever to change the American political and social system. However, Americans question about the credibility of the Chinese statement. Now, what does US want? Does US want a stronger, more wealthier, unified, free, democratic China, or US simply wants China to be a responsible stakeholder in global affairs regardless of what its political and social system is and regardless of its governance behavior? And that is the fundamental problem. It takes time to fix this big problem. And so what should we do now? I think for now, we should at least, number one, to give China credit where it is due. For American leaders to go to Africa, Latin America, and other developing countries and to declare that China is evil, that either you play with us, or if you play with China, we're not going to play with you, that's counterproductive. U.S. also should draw red lines where they are necessary. So there are things that U.S. government will make it clear to China that we're not going to tolerate this. If you're going to do this, then we're not going to be able to get into partnership. And lastly, I think is to find where U.S. and China can collaborate, whether it is in the Korean Peninsula, whether it is in the Middle East, or in Africa, which I'm going to talk about later today. So at this point, I think questioning the soundness of engagement is unwise. It is the policy of engagement that has changed China. It is the policy of engagement that's made these two great countries of different cultures, histories, political systems, stabilizers of this turbulent world. It is the policy of engagement that has enabled China, US, and the entire world to enjoy peace and prosperity. So question that is unwise. We are all, in the words of Oval Shell over the weekend at Berkeley, we're all children of engagement. So it is incumbent upon us to defend and sustain that policy. Thank you very much.